So that would be like telling me you went to school in America, kindergarten, high school, college, PhD, and you never heard of the United States Constitution, things like that. So those are some of the key things you will find in touchstone. A lot of artifacts tell you brilliant stories. You definitely get a deeper understanding of a lot of things that would explain more difficult appearing things that you see in other temples. Now, some major temples that you're going to spend a lot of time in, and especially the sisters want to be sure and visit the temple of Queen Makari Hatshepsut. This is the first woman in history to ever rule a country all by herself. An artist's depiction of her brother is on the poster here. Tahuti Mose III is the younger brother that you see in front of the major pyramids of Hatshepsut. He assumed the throne after her. But most of his job was a lot easier because of things she had done when she was on the throne. One key sojourn that she made that's depicted on her tomb is when she visited the land of Punt, or Pawneet. It's present-day Somalia and southern Ethiopia. What it tells on the story and shows graphically, it has a picture of the Queen of Punt. And up to this time, if you still had any doubt as to who the ancient Ethiopians, Nubians, Egyptians were, this would remove all the doubt. Most Egyptologists, in trying to smear the sister on the wall, claim she had some kind of disease they call elephantitis. So you get some idea of what she probably looked like when you see the picture. But they moved that particular frieze out of the temple and put it in the museum and put a facsimile there. But it's adequate, it still gives you a good impression of what it is. Not only did Queen Makari Hatshepsut rule Kemet, she also led one of the most beautiful temples in the whole country. Her temple is located at Dir El Bari. I'm not sure that Dir El Bari is, it's on this map. It's adjacent to the necropolis at Thebes. That's the area it's in. It's a three-tiered temple. It's also carved out of the side of the mountain as a backdrop. It would probably take you about half a day to really study what's in there. Also, there's a record on the wall of where she had her chemists and alchemists to devise what we call today a spermicide. And a lot of that information is in the Devil's Papyrus, showing how Planned Parenthood existed even back then among us. Because obviously, with the chores of running the country, she couldn't be saddled with having women and kids at the time, so she devised a way to, keep everything in perspective. Further down the Nile, and keep in mind, we're heading north, but we're going down because the river runs in the opposite direction. As you approach Saqqara, and you see the step pyramid, as I said earlier, you will know that this is the oldest stone building that's in the world. A lot of this probably won't hit you until after you come back from over there. You say, wow, as big as the world is, how is all this stuff still there? Hordes and hordes of conquerors have come in over the millennia. The French have come, the British, the Germans, all these people have come, they've wreaked havoc. They've attempted to destroy. You think you've seen graffiti on buildings here. You haven't seen it till you go there. It's like people were there 200 years ago, their name is still etched in the stone. Up in places, how they got up there through that. So one of the more serious acts of destruction and tragedy is most of the statues you see, strange as it seems, and they're carved out of solid rock, the noses are blown off, and all kinds of lips. So that should raise the curiosity. You should always ask the two, especially now, the brothers, the sisters that are down in Nubia, when they have you in the temples, and they're the tour guides, I noticed the explanation they give black people is different from what they tell the Europeans. It's like, there's a secret joke they have over there. They were saying, well, whenever European comes, if the French come, they just tell them it was the French that did all this. know. But once you talk to them, they say, yeah, but we know they were actually Nubians, you know, did it. So the tour guides, when they are giving you the information, you kind of want to be curious and ask, what happened to the noses of all these statues, you know? The largest one of all is the Great Sphinx, what they call Sphinx. Sphinx, again, is a Greek word, and it has to do with female. It has nothing to do with that statue. The statue is a production of the owner of the second largest pyramid there at Giza, among those three. See, that represents a father, son, and grandson during the 4th dynasty. Now, the one in the middle always looks taller because it's sitting on a higher plateau. But this one actually is the largest of Khufu, the King Khufu. Now, the Sphinx statue is of the owner of the second, his son, Khafre. I was trying to think of the Greek names, but I've been trying to train myself to get away from the Greek terminology. So, like Khufu, Khafre, and Ninkara are the three kings that had those pyramids constructed. Now, briefly, on those pyramids are basically what they're saying the Semites of the Jewish religion slaved on for 30 or however many years and constructed. Kemet being primarily an agricultural country, and the Nile River annually overflows its banks, meaning you got hundreds of thousands of farmers with nothing to do. So that had a labor source to construct those over that period of time, which would not have required any slave labor. They would be more than happy to assist their kings in constructing those. Now, I guess you would say, well, how would they know exactly when these people would be amassed and readily available for this? The reason for that is because we also gave the world the first calendar. So they know which time during the year the Nile River, or the River Happy as they call it, would overflow. One reason for a lot of our problems in this society today is we're out of harmony with time. Leap year being on the present calendar means obviously if someone's born on that day, there's going to be a time when they're not going to have a birthday for several years. So the question would be, well, how old is this person? The ancestors didn't have that problem. They had already worked that out back then. And this calendar here was even revised from a much earlier one. And it's even more accurate than the present one that's in existence now. Because this is based on a solar phenomenon, which is more accurate than the previous calendar based on a stellar, or the star phenomenon. Basically, a solar calendar that the ancestors derived that consisted of 3 seasons of 4 months with 30 days each. Now, calculating that right quick in your mind, you would say it only comes to 360 days. So how they worked that little problem out was they set aside 5 Kambuti celebration days in honor of their chief deities, namely those I mentioned earlier, Osiris, Isis, Horus, and in the pictures and carvings on walls, you always see Isis accompanied by her sister Nephthys. And you will always know who they are because there are certain symbols that they wear. Isis generally wears a little crown on her head. Nephthys wears a symbol that's indigenous to her. How this story has come down to us biblically is the Mary Martha story. That's where I've been able to draw the correlation between that and the other one, the last Hebu celebration day, is in honor of Set Typhon. I'm going to cover a little of that in a little bit. Set Typhon is the representation of evil. Osiris and his brother Set Typhon, as the story goes, Osiris was slain by his brother Set Typhon. Isis, in finding the body parts after it had been mutilated, restored them, but she could only find the body parts except for one. That was the favorite. So she had erected all throughout the land of Egypt, in his memory, what's known as an obelisk. So his enemies who dismembered him would always be reminded of the evil gentry.
Yeah.
Now, surely you can understand that's a story of murder.
Yes.
This is the first story we have anywhere in antiquity of a murder.
Right.
There was no Cain or Abel around yet. But that Typhon is very similar to Satan. You can see where that derived from. So that's basically an old story of Egypt of that first family there, which would mean they had 13 months there. So even in Ethiopia today, if you go to the tourist bureau and get a little packet or portfolio or something for Egypt or Ethiopia, it will say Ethiopia, 13 months of sunshine. So that's how they can derive the 13-month thing. But all this comes out even, see, 30 days each month, nothing short of over 3 out of whack at the time. So one of these seasons was for the inundation period, one was the growing period, and the other the harvest season. So having a method for keeping time, they could structure their daily lives and have time for building pyramids or all of the other numerous things they did and bring it to the world as a first. Now what's showing on this artist's rendition here is the star so petty. We'll call it today the dog star. One reason it was known as that is because when it rose helically annually, it signaled that the inundation season was about to start. So that's how they could structure a calendar around some fixed body that they knew from their history would always be visible. So it's a good thing if we begin to study a lot. Well, even when we were in the country, the old people know when to plant and all that kind of good stuff. And I always wonder how they knew. A lot of it has come down to us, maybe not scientifically. But unfortunately, a lot of young people are getting away from that and not familiar with it. The picture here, I have a larger one of it. This is a picture when I was at the temple of Horus at Edfu. And Horus is always depicted as a falcon. As you can see, it's wearing a double crown on his head. Symbolically, ancestors used nature to tell a story. So whatever animal, whatever they were using, if you knew what that particular thing did in nature, you could see why they chose that. One I was trying to recollect, there was an excellent example. Well, as I was telling you about the scarab, what it did in nature, by its egg being in the dung and resurrecting, symbolizing new life. I was going to kind of go over some things with you because of the time frame here. This is an ethno-linguistic map of the continent of Archipelago, commonly known as Africa. Some of the key things I'll put on here to kind of tell a brief story. Right here, and after the presentation, I'm going to get a closer look at some of this. This is the rock-hewn temple of Ramesses II at Abu Simbel, as you can see carved out of solid rock. Now, within the past, in the mid-60s, this was they moved this 600 feet back up the cliffside because of the rising waters of the Nile, because of the high dam. This is the adjoining temple of Nefertari. Her temple is dedicated to the goddess Hathor, a black woman in Kemet that's known as the goddess of fertility. Others have come and marred this. Even today, this is being worshipped symbolically in India. When you hear in India that the people are starving, but they have cattle and they won't eat the cows, that's because symbolically Hathor was always shown as a woman with cow's ears. So that people went to India and they worship the cow symbolically as that. So that's why it's considered sacred. We didn't worship the animals, we worship it symbolically. If perchance you get to go to the continent and it's not the area of the Nile Valley that you visit, the second choice I would highly recommend would be West Africa in the Mali area where the Dogon people are. These are some of the most spiritual people on the continent because they preserved a lot of the knowledge and the spirituality that was in the Nile Valley. Now, a few years ago, French scientists learned that the Dogon knew of the existence of the star Sirius that was is used in calendar making. By the way, this star is not visible by the naked eye. And Europeans only developed a telescope that could sight it a decade or so ago. So they're still wondering how the Dogon knew of its existence. And in fact, a lot of their ceremonies and dances are centered around that star and its orbit. A month or so ago, there was a series on cable there where African series by Basil Davidson. He visited the Dogon, and they showed him a lot of those rituals. Of course, they showed everything. There's a book called Serious Mystery you may want to see, and it details how the Dogon still preserve a lot of ancient knowledge. And because of commercialization of a lot of culture, a lot of this stuff is dying out. A lot of this hand craftsmanship they do, a lot of stuff is commercialized. The killing of elephants with ivory, a lot of the poaching goes on. So a lot of stuff that may be there now, in the coming years, obviously may not be there. So, but there are a few. You notice also, I'm not calling any of these people tribes. That's right. Because in countries on the continent, you may have a couple of countries on the continent that are bigger than the whole United States. That's right. So given the population, comparing it with countries in Europe, and they don't call themselves tribe, they don't call all these people a tribe. That's being utilized in terminology against us. Right. The Maasai people in the Kenya area are another group that have maintained a lot of the culture. Some of the things you would just notice right up front that you may take odd and can't figure out. Like the Maasai, I've noticed it appears the lions are afraid of them. The reason being, they've concocted a mixture of some elements that the lions can't stand the smell. So it appears to the tourists the lions are afraid of them. So a lot of tourists visit Kenya. And a lot of these brothers and sisters from this area of the continent are in our midst today. A lot of them are here. They may just all be placed in one category, like they would say, like they look like Nigeria. But within the country of Nigeria, you may have hundreds of different so-called ethnic groups, meaning they don't all speak the same language, they don't all do the same things. Like for example, the Hausa people in northern Nigeria for hundreds of years have been experts in leathercrafting. Other people, like the Yoruba, are known for their spirituality. I don't know if some of you all may have seen Oprah Winfrey show last week. They had some representatives from a village in South Carolina called Ondinga. The brother that's over this village is an actual priest in the Yoruba religion. And a lot of tenets in religions today that we practice had its origin there, because a lot of it has come through Catholicism. How they were able to hide it from the slave master. So a lot of that is among us today. That village, by the way, in South Carolina is open to the public. So if you get a chance to visit it, there was just so much stuff, you would have. It would take the rest of your life to seriously digest all of this. Okay. I mean, when I'm around the brothers that have been at this like 40 years or so, I really feel like I don't know anything. Yeah, I can get some impression. This is a book I was lucky to stumble upon. It doesn't seem to be too plentiful. It's called Cult of the Black Virgin. What this deals with is what I was talking about earlier, about the worship of the black woman, the goddess Isis. The Black Madonna child worship originated in the Nile Valley area. It was taken to Europe by the Greeks. Up until recently, all of the icons, the statues, and many of them still are there, are depicted as black. So it wasn't until Michelangelo painted in the Sistine Chapel in Rome the first white Mary and child. Yeah. So we can begin to see that even in Europe, they got the truth, and we here, who are the descendants of the people, still have somebody else depict as being the person. So these are some of the things we can begin to deal with. By the way, this book lists all throughout Europe over 400 locations where there have been sightings, or actually there are statues at. And a lot of them are like bedazzled in precious jewels costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. You know, some of the more expensive ones they have are like in the Soviet Union, in Spain, and various other places. So oftentimes, what I've learned is most Black Americans get an opportunity to visit Europe before they get a chance to go to Africa. So you can take full advantage of that also. The London Museum, the Louvre in Paris, the Berlin Museum in West Germany are some places you would want to visit if you get the opportunity, because a good much of the artifacts belonging to us, and at some point in time we will have to reclaim, are in their possession. You know, and it's like nobody gave it to them. Just like the artifacts in the tombs that they have, when they say they acquired them, you know, they never go into how they acquired them. But really, you don't have to go all the way overseas to see a lot of it. You can start right here in Dallas. On the second floor of the Dallas Museum of Art, they have a statue of, a bust rather, of Setai I, who's the father of Ramesses II. And of course, the nose is chopped off. And they have a little piece underneath indicating who has bequeathed this bust, you know, to them, who it came from. It would be interesting to contact those people to see how they came into the possession of this. But also it's interesting because a lot of you probably heard that the King Tut tomb was a source of curse. The brother I mentioned earlier, who's the Egyptologist who's been to Kemet more than 40 odd times, have been in his tomb that many times, and he's yet to be cursed. And, it was last summer that I was in there, so I'm still waiting on the curse. But it's interesting, Europeans who had carted off artifacts from the tomb, once the curse stories started coming out, they started mailing back a lot of stuff they had stolen without putting a return address on it.
Very good.
So definitely, New York, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Brooklyn Museum, these are key places. If you get a chance to visit, you can see a lot of this stuff that they've carted off over here. At the Metropolitan Museum in New York, there's a temple known as the Temple of Dendur. That's a Nubian temple, and the carvings on the wall are extremely Africoid. But this is a temple that they didn't take like a little bust or a statue. They removed the whole temple, put it adjacent to the Metropolitan Museum in New York, in such a haste to get it in place. They then built a wing over the temple. So you can go and see that, you know, the whole thing is there. And they have no remorse, you know, they're non-apologetic in terms of ever returning it unless they're forced to.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the purposes of that conference last summer in Kemet was to reclaim our culture and homeland.
Right.
So we can't be faulted for this because all other ethnic groups are today claiming those things that belong to them that are in other people's countries. Like World War II, when the Germans invaded and claimed artifacts from peoples, those people now want their things back.
Yeah.
So same here. We have to begin to know what is ours, though, and differentiate, because they aren't ever going to teach this in the schools. You can rest assured, you know, because their whole school system is designed to advance the one who established it.
That's right.
So studying history, no people ever established a high culture or civilization to serve others. Whenever others were in their midst, they just accommodated them to the extent to serve their purpose. So, you know, we have to be about the business of getting the house in order to where we can preserve the artifacts for the youth, because of all of the images they see of others just take on those attributes. And so, up until a few years ago, all the people that were doing all of the hot psychedelic drugs were the bumpy types and the fast lane people. So they saw it as being role models, now they're emulating. And experts with the PhDs are now claiming they don't know why all this has come about. So it doesn't really take that much, you know, deep analysis to figure these things out. But I can't encourage you enough that at some point in time, you want to make a visit to the motherland. You'll never be the same if you just go there and don't see any of this, the effect it's going to have on you, you're going to have a natural high for a long period of time with just being in the atmosphere. I mean, the first thing that struck me, the next morning when I got up, when I was in Oswan, overlooking Elephantine Island, and I didn't forgive me for not mentioning earlier, but the temple of Isis is an even more important temple dedicated to a sister than Queen Hatshepsut's temple. Isis' temple on the island of Angelica, the Philae temple of Isis previously was located at Philae. Because of the inundation waters of the Nile, they had to move that temple also to the island of Angelica. The particular hotel I was in at Aswan can overlook the island of Angelica and Elephantine. Just the non-polluted air in the atmosphere, standing on the balcony of the hotel is worth the trip alone. So you never be the same. You can save up all the money for film and camera. You're going to be, 24 hours a day. You never ever want to go to bed. If you do, the Nubians aren't going to let you because they're going to insist that you be among them so they can show you all of what they've been doing for thousands of years. It just so happened when I was there, and by the way, they caution you, since your system is not acclimated to a lot of the foods and liquids over there, they suggest that you buy the water when you at the hotel and whatnot, not drink the tap water. But a lot of brothers and sisters were so hyper in joining Nubians in a lot of their activities, they just no holds barred, So it was close to 1,000 of us that went over there. Over half of them came down with diarrhea. We had balls and planes coming down. But anyway, there was a Nubian village outside the hotel I was at, and about the middle of the week, there was a wedding, that took place, and a lot of us that visited, so many of us, we went about 4 different hotels in the adjacent area, and some were on the island, so it wasn't convenient for some of them to attend some of the activities we were in. So a lot of them, even though some of them were in a more expensive hotel, they missed out on a lot of good activities because it was late and they couldn't get back in time to be up next morning for the conference. So one particular night, by the way, when you're in Aswan, I would recommend New Cataract Hotel because you get an excellent view of everything here, from all directions. It's adjacent to the old Cataract Hotel, and there's a Nubian village outside of the hotel. You just look out the balcony into the village, and you can walk down and be among the Nubians. So they will basically insist that you stay and join them in activities that they're having. So the particular night of the wedding is when we feel most people came down with illness, so they just indulged in everything they refused. Just like being down home, basically. A little bit on the temple of Isis. More graphically than anywhere else, in Isis' temple is carved on the wall her receiving symbolically the sperm from Osiris, being impregnated by the angel being depicted as a hawk, or a bird. Well, hawk and blackbird. So black people use the blackbird as opposed to the little white angel in other stories. So you can see where that story originated at. And that's one key temple you want to visit. I have some smaller pictures of some of the colonnades you can look at after the presentation of Isis Temple. Show you it's still well preserved. It's the granite stone blocks it's carved out of. I'm sure it's puzzling to some of you how it is that such monumental stonemasonry could have taken place in antiquity, because they show pictures of the tools they used on the temples. And there's nothing remotely resembling modern-day sophisticated tools that we have today. So they were able to do this type of building way back then, and this has lasted all this length of time. And the disrepair some of it's in is because, basically, not through erosion, but because of plunderers who have come. One reason there has not been erosion up to now, and there's beginning to be erosion, because of the Aswan High Dam has caused the climatical conditions to change. See, so the climate now that's in the air is bringing about some. Matter of fact, a few months ago, it was reported on the WR reports that a chunk of the Sphinx shoulder had fallen off. And it lay there a couple of days before the Egyptian Antiquities Department ever went out to take a look at it to be about the business of restoring it. You see, as I pointed out earlier, the people who control Egypt today are Muslim Arabs, and basically knowing they didn't originate this, they don't care that much about it. A lot of what they've done in terms of restoration over the past years has been as a result of people like Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben pressuring the government to do these things. So luckily those are some of the ones that have been preserved. A lot of them haven't. So Isis Temple is one of the key locations you would want to visit when you go there. Also, at Isis Temple and numerous other temples, the doorway in various parts of the temple have on either side of it, and you can see this after the presentation close, is a staff with a serpent wrapped around it going up it. Now, of course, we're familiar with this as the medical profession uses this symbol. It's called the Medusa. Symbolically, it represents man rising from his beastly nature. Yes. So the ancestors always use symbols, to tell the story. Now, of course, this serpent story obviously predates the one coming down the tree in Eden.
Yes.
All right. This is another scene. The morning I visited the temple of Horus at Edfu, we purposely left before sunrise because we had been told the sisters in the villages, when they would come to market, would have the big baskets on their heads. So we wanted to see this for ourselves, having heard so much about it. And sure enough, about halfway there, people started to rise and be about their daily activities, and we were able to see some people, coming to the marketplaces with the big baskets on their heads like they've done for thousands of years. So it's good to see that they still have preserved a lot of the culture. That's deep in the interior now of the country. You don't see most of this up in the Cairo area where most of the Muslim Arabs live. And that's unfortunate because what I begin to understand is that a lot of brothers and sisters, especially that I grew up with, who begun to reject Christianity thinking it's a white man's religion, and have gone into Islam, not knowing those who brought us into Eurocentric Christianity were no different from the Islamic slave master also. So even though the African is the origin of theology, it just has taken on a different taste and flavor since we've been in this setting. So that's good to keep in mind when you see those that are practicing various religions in that part of the continent. Has nothing to do with the way your ancestors were doing it, before they got there. So not to be confused with that. You probably heard the argument between those in Israel and the Palestinians. Those in Israel saying their God gave them that land, and the Palestinians saying their God didn't tell them nothing about it. That would be the same thing how this would apply to us when we bring our case to them. I'm going to close out the presentation and take some questions, and perhaps I can delve off deeper into other areas if there's some areas of concern you may have. Any questions so far? Anything I've covered?
Okay, like you were saying, that we never will learn, like our kids never will learn, like what you're teaching, in public schools, but like you were saying that they would have to get the teaching, like from somewhere else, like, okay, do you know of a place that's not public school, but someone else can teach the kids, things about themselves so they'll know more than what we know about ourselves?
Yeah, there's no institution locally, but throughout the country, people have set up liberation-type schools with the information. What I've been able to do in Dallas is encourage people to begin to acquire the information and the materials, and once the parents can become somewhat orientated, they can have the information available and around the house and visible to the children. So that would be a start. Just the imagery you would have around would have a subliminal effect. Then they will begin to question things, and if they question things, you can research and find out more about it yourself. So locally, I don't know specifically of an institution, but there are some groups. Now, I'm with Words of These Productions. That's primarily an information distributing entity. What I do is make available audio and some videotapes of some of the profound scholars in this field around the country who, for various reasons over the years, have not been able to come to this area. Although some of them have come to this area, most of us, probably aren't familiar with them in terms of name recognition, so they'll come and go, and we'll never know they were here. For example, there was a brother here about a couple of months ago, and I was working with a group that brought him used Bishop College facilities where he spoke at, Reverend Ishaka Musa Barashando. He's with the Temple of the Black Messiah in Washington, D.C. He's a prolific biblical scholar from the standpoint of showing how most of this doctrine originated among African people, and which parts have been changed. So whenever I hear rumor that those type of people are going to be around, I try to be sure and see them. I can mention, this is really not set right now, but I've formed a group in the last several weeks. We're thinking about bringing in a sister out of Washington, D.C. As some of you may have seen on Donahue's show back in January, Dr. Frances Cress Walden. Yes. And she's one of the most profound analytical minds in terms of the problems we face in this country. Her position is predicated upon the global threat to white genetic survival is her definition of racism. So, being around people like that, a lot of this just, you're overwhelmed by it, and it becomes easier to explain it to the children. So we're working on possibly bringing her here before the year is out, hopefully before the end of October. I understand possibly she's going to be in Houston in less than a month, so I'll be checking with that. But a lot of the materials, a lot of her lectures, and a lot of other key people I make available. So obviously you can't see New York, Harlem, places like that where there's a large black population. They've been at this a long time because knowing the history of us in this country, black people migrated from the south to the northern areas. So they've had longer to work at putting a lot of all this together over the years. Now, Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, Ivan Van Sertima, my brother who wrote the book, They Came Before Columbus, with undisputable documented evidence, African presence was in the Americas long before Columbus. This past year, he went before Congress to short stop the madness that's going to be taking place next summer on all of the celebration of Columbus's voyages of discovery. So he's already got Congress to indicate that they won't be celebrating that, in that sense. But people like him, they're on the circuit, and they're in New York and places, New Jersey all the time. I have contacts where I can get their tapes and things, make them available, so I keep posted on later developments. But even me keeping up with this to some degree, unless you really add it, a lot of stuff takes place. And sometimes I realize I didn't know about something that happened several months ago. But there are people around the country who will come in for little or nothing and conduct workshops and show you how to set up institutions. And since they're really not nationally known, they really want to charge an arm and a leg. And I have seen people like that through here. There is a group locally, the Third Eye, for the past several years. They've had conferences annually, and they brought in some of those type people. As a matter of fact, I was one of the founding members of that group. But after a while, a lot of people they were bringing in, I didn't feel really covered a broader spectrum of a lot of the history and culture. So me and some other people kind of branched off and doing some other things. And from time to time, we work in conjunction with them. Black Images Bookstore, I would encourage you all to visit periodically because they're always getting their new material. Now, for example, Dr. Ben has been writing since back in the late 30s. One of his first publications was, and by the way, he was born in Ethiopia to Hebrew parents, but today he does not he's not into that religion today. But at that time he was, and his first publication was We, the Black Jews, Bear Witness to the White Jewish Race Myth. So in that title, he's showing that those people call themselves Jews are in fact not the originators of that doctrine. Now, several of his books I would highly recommend you try to obtain because periodically, since he has to publish them himself, unlike the big publishing houses, oftentimes a lot of them are out of print. Africa, Mother of Western Civilization is one key book that really covers a broad spectrum of the background and understanding. Also, mentally brought with me a book list that you all may want to keep in mind once you start your search for a lot of the background. A brother by the name of John Jackson has an excellent book called Introduction to African Civilization. In that publication, he is very expository in the background, and he does it very simple, not in a lot of the technical sense. Sheikh Anta Diop is a brother from Senegal in West Africa, among the Wolof people. His book, African Origin of Civilization, once you kind of advance some, is an excellent publication you may want to deal with. But several other, and I have here with me tonight a partial listing of some of Dr. Ben Yakanan's book. Black Man of the Nile and His Family is an excellent one. Our black seminarians and black clergy without the black theology is an excellent publication because a section of that book shows some white Jewish rabbis changing the Bible just in our time to suit their liking.
Yes.
You know, so we have to be conscious of what publications we're getting and what's the source of it. So keep
that question. Okay, we know all the religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity originated from Africa, and Africa is the cradle of all civilization. But what I want to know is what religion and what way did they worship? And I was reading that they worship gods, and the gods had goddesses. Is this true? And what gods did they worship?
Okay, in terms of the gods and the goddesses, that's from the concept the ancestors developed in nature, understanding that all things in nature had equilibrium or a law of opposites as known to us. If they saw something was hot, then they knew the opposite would be cold. There was up, there was down. So consequently, they know if there was a god, there had to be a goddess.
Yes.
So they didn't refer to the Creator as God, He, because if we are reflective of the creative force, then the Creator would only have to have been a man. It would only be men on earth,
Yeah.
reflective of that creative force. So the ancestors were not religious. That has explained to me why they were devoid of a lot of the problems I see in religions today. They were primarily spiritual.
Yes.
So I felt all people were spiritual, and religion being something that was concocted by a man to suit his interests, that would alleviate a problem right there. So the problem that they may have had with the various deities, I have learned how they minimize whatever problem that was. And what I cited earlier about the double crown, that was an example of, in Upper Egypt, the deity was known by a particular name. In Lower Egypt, it was known by a different name. So the priesthood in the different areas didn't correspond their teachings to the other one. So what they did was merge the two. So an earlier deity in, say, Lower Egypt was Amen, A-M-E-N. Obviously, from whence we get the term, it's come down to us.
Amen.
When they merged the two deities, Ra was the deity in the south, so it became Amen Ra. So it's interesting how that meaning has begun to mean so be it. Amen Ra was the deity the ancestors worshipped in antiquity. And by the way, the ancestors did not worship many gods, because like I said about Akhenaten, the concept of monotheism in wide circles is been known to originate with him, but it existed as a concept long before him. So then that means that they understood above all of the lesser deities, there was the one creative force that transcended all of that, and they had the various names for it.
Okay. Question. Yes, Mike.
I just wanted to know, how long have you been studying, and what inspired you to start out to know about your ancestry?
Well, basically, late 60s, when I first started to question a lot of things. Of course, keeping in mind, hopefully I don't look that old. This is during the era of the Vietnam War, and luckily for me, there were people in Dallas who were agitating against the war. And although I didn't know much about the civil rights movement at the time, because I went to live with relatives in the early 60s. I didn't come back to Dallas until 64. So a lot of what went on in the civil rights movement I wasn't familiar with. And so at the height of a lot of anti-war efforts, of course, getting close to time for me to no longer be in high school, I was trying to figure out how was it then I was not going to have to go over to the war that I didn't particularly agree with. So there were people here like Smith, and I would observe them, and that was causing me to start questioning things. And by the time I was in high school, I was questioning, should I even stand up for the flag since they got the flag where they're killing people? So it just started adding up. I questioned things that people didn't want to answer it. I would just bring up more questions. So that's why it's definitely a good idea to try to give sensible answers to the children when they ask. Because if they don't get an answer from you, then they're to get it elsewhere and it may be the wrong answer. So that's what kind of steered me in the direction. But the key thing was I was able to go to Chicago in the early 70s, and a lot of what had went on in the 60s was still pretty much prevalent in Chicago. I mean, there was like numerous black bookstores, none of which I had ever seen before. I mean, I would sometimes go down to the bookstore and spend the whole day in there looking at stuff. And people would come in and see me, someone interested, tell me other things about this is going on over here and that kind of things over there. So establishing those kind of contacts and getting all the more curious, it put me in a position to be receptive to information and ideas as I would come up on them and not have a closed mind. That's one of the important areas to really go about it. Even if a lot of it you don't understand, if you go about it with an open mind, you more readily digest it and be able to question it better.
I know that the Holy Bible says that in the beginning God created Adam and Eve, and you kind of touched on something earlier. Now, what I want to know is what kind of concept, what does the African ancestry have to say about Adam and Eve? Where did the woman come from? The origin. Where did the woman come from? Do they say that she come from the man? Or I know that according to this Bible, this is 6,000 years, there was us, way back then. So, what is the origin? I mean, after God, who did he create? I mean, do they have anything to say what it says?
Okay, first I noticed you said God. That's something we have to think about too.
Yeah.
Yes, God isn't a man. God represents both the feminine and the masculine qualities. So, in the African concept of the origin of man, well, obviously, since no man was there when this was being done, no man can tell me what took place. He wasn't there. So what happens is, man, in order to explain this, develops concepts. What makes the ancestors' concepts so classical, because unlike other people that deal with a lot of stuff that really don't make any sense, the ancestors use nature to tell the story. So in terms of origins, they depicted various pictures. Now, by the way, along the banks of the Nile, there are numerous stories of creation. And you can see how they come down to us and have been borrowed. One of the main ones that I have copied on the leaflet information is at the temple in Upper Egypt of Esna, where the god Khnum is fashioning man on his potter's wheel out of clay. And obviously, the Jews just stole the story and forgot to put the wheel in there.
That's what I want to know.
Okay, what I want to know is your name. Was you originally born with a name, or you had an American?
I had the same name.
The same name? Okay.
No, I had slave name previously.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was thinking about. Whether it was, it was from Africa originally, and comes to the United States, and decided to, change the name as you come into the history of the black people.
But the latter part of your comment is true. I'm homegrown. I went to Lincoln High School. I'm from here. So, this is the name I've taken on, and this particular name derives from the eastern part of the continent. Once you come into the culture and the history, and if you decide to select an African name, so like a lot of people that grew up with me in rejecting Western Christianity and adopting Islam, they've taken on Arabic names. But see, we aren't Arabs, in Arabic, because a lot of what I discussed tonight, there were no Arabs. And by the way, Arabs, just like Jew, is not an ethnic group, is not a race of people. So them having adopted Arabic culture and Arabic names is showing that they really don't know their history as a people. So when you begin to want to adopt an African name, it's good to kind of study some of the history of what some people did. Now, a lot of people I've met around the country really taking names of people that I didn't know about, but because they had a certain name, I went and studied and researched who they were talking about, and they really have some glorious history behind it. One name in particular that a lot of sisters I've known around the country have adopted is Ondinga. This sister ruled the country also in West Africa. She was called the Amazon Queen. And a lot of history is involved in that. So once you hear a lot of African names, you just about know it has to do with some great person. And this helps to keep that spirit alive, among them. A lot of people, especially black people, somewhat take offense at black people changing their names, but it's like you would never go anywhere on the globe and find a European with a name like the Mumba or the Kruma.
That's true. That's right.
Yeah. What I want to know is, okay, your name has been chosen. Now, is there any kind of way? Okay, we're not tribes. Okay, those are countries, nations. What you say? Okay. Is there any way by a facial feature, height, stature, or any way you can kind of like tell who we are? That's what I'm trying to say. What nation we come from?
Yeah, but that's one purpose of this ethno-linguistic map. So you can kind of look at it and see which areas people in to look more like people in certain other areas. But one thing that was humorous, when we were in Aswan, which is, of course, in Nubia, about the second day we were there, like, a lot of people really didn't attend most of the conferences, but they were out busy shopping in the bazaar. They just couldn't get away from out there. So after about the second day, we noticed in the lobby of the hotel each morning, we thought sisters who had come over with us, they were wearing the garments the Nubian women were wearing. So after a while, we couldn't tell the difference between them and us. Oh, that's one of Dr. Ben's excellent books you're able to get. Also, it's called "They All Look Alike," all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to know if you plan to visit the other parts of Africa or you just like to go to the north.
Oh, definitely want to visit the church. That's what I was saying earlier. For those who can't possibly visit Egypt, you definitely want to visit the area of West Africa from whence most black Americans came. Because evidence shows, this is the area most of us was taken out of. And especially Goree Island off the coast of Senegal, they still have artifacts there that paints the picture of how it possibly was at that time. I would highly recommend. One reason the emphasis is on Kemet is because the classical civilization is still preserved there. The origins of a lot of the artifacts. The example would be, we realize that, for example, in Nigeria, among the Yoruba, etc., they have what's called a fertility doll. But only recently have I realized the fertility doll is basically the same as the Ankh symbol. They're shaped just alike. The fertility meaning life and the Ankh meaning life. So they're just taking the culture there with them. So I would definitely recommend. You got it.
I just wanted to ask, if you had chosen to change your name, with the African name, how would you go about doing that?
You just, today, what you want to call yourself? Well, yeah, you could do that, but I have a problem with this. Almost like going asking somebody for permission,
Yeah.
You can eventually do that for all this legalistic mumbo jumbo, but most of my friends, they have not done it legally, and for years, we've been calling ourselves Batman. So this is the option that rests with the person. One thing, let's see, once you go, I'll give a briefly. I'll give a quick scenario on possibly give you the opportunity to make a tour. What you want to get done and get out of the way up front, and eliminate a lot of problems later on, is you have to get a passport. So for that kind of stuff, decide what you want on the passport. So you have to be legal in that sense. But taking the trip, you will need a passport and materials like that. So you may want to consider whether you want to do it or you have to do that.
Okay, like in the country, say what is it, Nubia?
Nubia.
Okay, you say when you go over there, they greet you just like black on black, But like, if you would go to some of the other countries, like over another part of Africa, do you think they would treat us different?
Well, if they know. See, keep in mind, the same source of our mental undoing, they've been victims in a lot of parts of the continent of that same situation also. So, they've probably been told for years that them black folks over there are not like y'all. They ride around a Cadillac and say, go sit down and walk. They're not like y'all. And like we just talked about them, they all eat folks in the hot raw.
To the
the best of your knowledge, can you tell me why the Europeans brought us back over here to the United States, and why did they let them do that?
Okay. Well, it wasn't like come visit us for spell. I can assure you. After the indigenous people here on this continent, who weren't Indians by the way, because Cristobal Colon, who they call Cristobal Colon, got lost. Also thought the world is flat. And the people who built all these monuments had to know the world was round 1,000 years ago to get the right measurements and whatnot, triangulation and whatnot. So the fact that the indigenous people here, who call themselves Cherokee, Sioux, etc., Navajo, decided that they were cut out from cotton picking and Baptist they decided to wipe them out when they no longer had any need for them, which is a heavy message for us when they have no longer need for us. Now, coming to North America wasn't the first. Oh, let me back up quick. The first of us who came to the Western Hemisphere was not brought from Africa. Those of us who had went into Southern Europe and made it what it is today, first school system, first university, people who were called in antiquity the Blackamoors. There's a book, I can't think of the author's name right now, but it's called Blacks in Antiquity. He even has pictures in there for a lot of artifacts that they found today in Europe. Spain, Barcelona, all these places. The Blackamoors who had went there from Carthage and countries along the northern borders of the continent, after they lost power in the 16th century, the Pope decided that these were people they could use in the Caribbean islands to harvest the tobacco and the sugarcane. So they initially brought them there. And so that kind of became like a stop-off point to break in the rebellious slaves before they brought them on to North America. Now, they didn't willingly, see, the stories that are told about this are told by the ones doing the bringing. So if it was the victims doing the storytelling. So it's just like all the stories of Juan in the jungle with the rifle and the lion. The lions don't write the stories, so we don't get to understand.
That's true. When I said you decided later on to change your name, as you came to the knowledge of your African culture. But what I want to know, you say that most of the names have a meaning of a great person or something like that, keep up the spirit. What does the meaning of your name?
That's interesting. Well, okay, most Africans, of course, obviously they have African names. Their names mean something in terms of, well, for example, a person may have a name that indicates when they were born. So I ran into people that when they told me their name, and they say, well, like, I was born a minute after midnight, and that's what my name means. But most Black Americans that take on African names, or like I said, name themselves after great Africans. Now, for years, when I was attempting, I had saw this brother, Ondinga, who was in Kenya. He was second in command under Jomo Kenyatta. These were the people who led the fight against the British who occupied Kenya up until the early 60s. After reading his autobiography, I saw that he played a more important role than Jomo actually played. Now, most African countries have embassies in Washington, D.C. and consulates in other cities around the country, like the larger cities, Chicago, New York, San Francisco. A lot of information you want to find out, you can just pick up the phone and call somebody in the consular embassy and give it to you. So one day, since I couldn't find in his autobiography where he was saying actually what that family name meant, I called the Kenyan embassy. It just so happened the person I spoke to was a Luo, the same ethnicity as Ondinga was. And she said the name had no particular meaning, but it had to do with a long, prominent family history in that region. So oftentimes it may not mean specifically something, but I'm almost certain way back when they may have chosen it because of various circumstances or what have you. But in that area, keep in mind, it's where the ancient Egyptians are saying in their papyrus that's in the museum in London, we came from the beginning of the Nile, and see for centuries Europeans trekked to the interior of the continent to find the source of the Nile. I mean, hundreds of them died through malaria. I mean, they were just obsessed with having to find this. So now that they found it, we see now where the origin of it is. And see, one reason for the Nile River overflowing annually is because anyway, you have rivers that what causes inundation is